this is the before and this is the after, and we can just click around here and you can see how much better this photo looks. Hey, how's it going? My name's Quinn, and today we're going to do some editing in Lightroom. And specifically, we're going to edit travel photos, photos that have, you know, the sky and the dark, like the mountains in the sky, stuff with a lot of dynamic range. So I want to show you today how to bring the detail back into your photos that you lose when when the sky is overexposed, for example. And that will differ for every camera. It depends on the camera you shot the photos with. But with these photos, I shot these photos with Canon 6D, and it has 10 stops of dynamic range. And the crazy thing is our eyes actually have 24 stops of dynamic range. So what does that mean exactly? Well, when you get your photos back and you take a look at them, they never look, the scene never looks like it did when your eye saw it in person. And that's because our eyes are unbelievable unbelievable lenses. So when I look outside right now, I'm seeing, you know, the bright sky, but I can also still see the details in this camera. I can still see some of the details in the blacks of this camera in the corner of my eye. And I'm seeing the details of the highlights outside. That's dynamic range. Our eyes are incredible, and our cameras just can't keep up with that. So what I like to do in my photo editing is I like to, try to bring that, what I saw with my eye, back into the photo. I try not to go too extreme. I try not to make it unrealistic. I try to make it as realistic as possible, and try to, capture that essence of what I was seeing with my eyes at that time. So let's dive in and see if we can achieve that today. So let's open up Lightroom, and I'm going to show you the before and then the after. So this is the look that we're going to try to achieve today. This is what the photo looked like before. And obviously you can see that that's quite a drastic change. So what we really want to do is, try to get as much of the detail back in all the highlights as we can. And that's, again, talking about the dynamic range. And then just bring this photo to life. It's pretty bland like this. So how did we do that? How did we achieve that look? So the first thing that we want to do is we want to take a look at exposure. And I'm going to bring this exposure down to maybe about here, maybe about there. That looks pretty good to me. Let's take a look at what we had over here. So we did have the same levels over here. So I'm going to kind of copy this, but I'm going to explain as I go. First thing that you want to do when you're doing this stuff is bring the exposure down, because that's going to help you see the details in the photo and really see what the photo really should have looked like. I shot this a little bit hot. So let's bring that down first. Next thing I do is I bump the contrast. So let's bring that contrast up. I bring the blacks down a little bit. And then of course with this sky being blown out, I'm going to bring the highlights all the way down just to start. Pretty good. I don't think we're losing a lot of detail anywhere else. So let's just keep those all the way down. Bring the clarity up just a touch. Don't go crazy with the clarity tool. That's very important. Just a little bit. There, about 10. And then I'm going to bump the vibrance and saturation just a touch here. So let's go to 5 and 12 there. Okay, that's a pretty good starting point. Let's bring the shadows up so we get some of the details back down here. And what about the whites? I think the whites we can just sort of leave. If you double click, if you make a change and then you double click on it, it'll bring it back to 0. So far, let's take a look at what we were doing over here. Okay, we brought the whites down over here. So let's bring those down like we did. And we brought the blacks down a little bit more. Perfect. So that's the starting point. And already, obviously, let's press Y and see this side by side. This is crazy. A crazy result in just a few minor adjustments, right? And again, this is going to depend on your camera. This Canon 6D that this was shot on has 10 stops of dynamic range, which is pretty decent for getting the details back in, the blown out areas and stuff like that. And then in the dark areas, bringing the details back up too. So it's pretty good. It's not the best out there, but it's not bad. So another thing that we want to take a look at is the split toning. I did do some split toning on this. So what did we do? I marked it down. So we had 215 here. We had this bumped up just a little bit. What do we got? And then we had 81. And then 21. Okay. So obviously you can dial these in as you see fit. you know, you can change the color here, and then just change the saturation level and just achieve the look that you want. But let's just keep it around this for now. That looks pretty good. Another thing that we want to do is as we start to, you know, bring the highlights down, all of these areas are going to start to get looking a little funky because of the chromatic aberration. So this is something that the camera does because I think it's actually the lens. It doesn't know what color to put in this area. So what we're going to do, and you see that a lot when you bring the highlights down, you're going to see it just didn't have the detail. So what we're going to do is we're just going to remove chromatic aberration, and then it does an amazing job. Like Lightroom's crazy. So we're going to click that. We're going to leave this unchecked. So that's pretty good. So now we've got a good base. We've got a pretty good base here. What I really want to do in this case though is I want to bring the highlights down even further on the sky to get even more detail up here. So what we're going to do is use our brush, and what I'm going to do is just reset all of this. So we're going to reset all that, and I'm going to bring the highlights down all the way. Let's see what that does. And if that's too much, let's see what we got. Okay, that's pretty good. So we're gonna just scrub this, and if you want to see the overlay, just press O and you'll see that pop up. So we're gonna paint this mask in here. This takes a little bit of time, but I'll go through it like quickly first, and then I'll go in with the detail. And don't worry if you paint over stuff, because we can erase that later. Okay. I feel like Bob Ross all of a sudden. I wish. So now what we want to do is we want to shrink the brush. So actually, if you just use your scroll wheel, you'll be able to shrink or enlarge the brush. So I'm going to shrink it, and I'm going to come in, and like I said, don't worry if you screw up, because we're going to erase all that later. So let's go in here. And by the way, if we take this overlay, take this overlay off, you'll see what's happening here. We don't want too much of this on the mountains, though we could. I mean, that's not that bad. So I wouldn't worry too much about getting too overly detailed on this, because there's not a ton of highlights in the mountains, right? So just, you want to make sure you're catching all these little white spots. Now what we want to do is, if you hit Alt on your keyboard, you can actually toggle the eraser, and then you can do the same thing with the eraser. As you can shrink or enlarge. So I'm going to shrink again, or I'm going to, so you can back and forth. You know, I'm hitting Alt right now, Alt and undo. So now I'm just going in and I'm getting rid of these little mistakes that I made using the Alt key and the eraser. You're going to notice these chunks more than if you painted over the mountains. You're going to notice if you didn't paint the white spots. So we just want to make sure everything's looking good. I think it's looking pretty good. I'm not too upset about that. So again, let's take a look. Did we miss anywhere? We did kind of miss a couple spots, so let's just make sure all of these spots are good. Perfect. So are there some issues here still? Yeah, we still have some highlights that are blown out, but I don't really care. I'm not too concerned about it. It's going to start to look too unrealistic if we mess with it too much. This is something that you don't want to do as well. If you start to bring the exposure down, yeah, the clouds look cool, but look at what's happening here. That means you got to go in with really fine detail, and I just don't have the time for that most of the time. So what I usually do is I leave the exposure as it is. I bring the highlights down, and then I bring the shadows down just a bit. And you can see the shadows are doing the same thing with this issue up here. So now that we can actually see this, let's go in and get rid of those little spots. Is anyone going to notice? Probably not. Probably no one can tell the difference and call you out on this, but we don't want to take the chance, right? So not take the chance. I mean, it's your art here, so you do what you want to do. But for me, I'm not concerned about others' criticism. I'm just doing what I think looks best. There's a little bit here that I want to paint back in. So let's paint that back in, paint that back in. Okay, that's pretty good. So now what I want to take a look at is this bottom area. This bottom area looks a little too bright. It takes a little bit of the focus away of the mountains. So what I want to do is take this graduated filter, and you can create this gradient sort of look here. So I'm going to start, actually I'm going to start more at the bottom so you can grab this and move it down. So I'm going to rotate this a little bit. I'm going to just make it nice and straight and drag this up a little bit more. And then with this one, highlights can stay down, that's fine. And let's bring this one, we can get away with bringing the exposure down a bit. Not too much, just subtle, that's pretty good. Maybe we can do the shadows a bit instead of the exposure. So let's bring the exposure back up and bring the shadows down. So now all of a sudden we're seeing, we're more focused on the mountains, which is good for me, I like that. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is get rid of this, and I'm going to paint over my wife, Jess, because I think that she looks a little bit too dark. So I'm going to go to the brush, and I'm going to go new. So it's going to create a new brush, and I'm going to paint over Jess. So let's put the overlay on. Just going to do this quick and dirty. Not bad. This isn't going to be a drastic sort of increase in exposure or anything. Probably just going to bring the shadows up on it. So I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect. And obviously we can tweak it and we can erase and stuff. Whoops, undo that. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's erase this little chunk up here that we messed up on. By the way, again, I'm hitting Alt to do that. Okay, so now let's take the overlay off. And let's bring the shadows up. And wow, that's awesome. So we don't want to go crazy because we're going to see the edges. So we don't want to see the edges. So we just want to go up just a bit. It's pretty good. And then let's just zoom in and just make sure that we're not missing any of this stuff like crazy. So if you hold down spacebar, you're able to move this stuff around. So I'm noticing, like I said in the other stuff, what you want to be on the inside versus the outside here. You don't want this stuff to be outside because you're going to see that line on the outside. If anything, go conservative on the inside. So let's do that. Just cut this a little bit here, a little bit here. We don't want to see that white line. You're going to give it away, right? We don't want to give this stuff away. And again, my goal here is to make this look like as if I was there. Like this is what I wanted to see, what my eye, I want everyone to see what my eye saw. That's my goal in this photo edit. So let's go down here. If I stick my tongue out, you know I'm focusing. Try not to stick it out though. Okay, that's pretty good. And let's take a look. And I'm seeing a little bit. So what I want to do, so what my next trick here, for my next trick, I'm actually going to increase the feather of the eraser. And now I'm going to bring that up, and I'm actually going to throw that on here. And we're going to get rid of any of that sort of glowy halo stuff that's happening around here. And if we click on you'll see what's sort of happening. Okay, cool. But now, at this point, I sort of just go by my eye. I don't worry about the overlay. Kind of take a look down here. Looks pretty good. Why did we do all that other detailed work? I don't know. Okay. I think this is looking really nice. That's great. Now, are we close to the other one that we had earlier? Let's see. Pretty close. Pretty close. Okay, so now let's, I think we're going to, you know what we're going to do? We're going to bring the highlights back up so we get just a little bit brighter. And let's zoom that out and see what we get. That's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm pretty happy with it. I don't think it's quite where this one is. I think this one just, sometimes that happens. Obviously my lines are a little bit better in this one, you can see. They're just a little bit cleaner. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how this looks, how this turned out. We could probably just tweak the color a little bit so to match this. So let's go down here to split toning and bring that up, saturation up a bit. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. This is the before and this is the after, and we can just click around here and you can see how much, you know, better this photo looks. Now, is this ultra realistic? Is this too crazy? Is this beyond what my eye saw in person? Maybe. I would say probably. This is maybe a little bit extreme, but you know, this is the style that I chose for this one. If I was going to finalize this edit, I might change it a little bit. But really, that's up to you. That's all up to your discretion, your style. This is like I said, this is your art, so you do what's best for you. Don't worry about what anyone else thinks. But again, you know, the sign of a beginner photographer is that you go too crazy. Don't go too crazy on this stuff. This might be too crazy. I'm not a beginner, but this might be too crazy. But what you really want to do is get in there with the detailed brush. Get in there with a brush. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. Get those all those edges, you know, nicely cut out. We didn't do it in this video, but for the sake of time. But that's what you really want to do to make this elevated, and especially if you're going to blow this photo up. That's something that you really want to make sure that you do. Pay attention to those details, because when you get it this big and on a canvas and you see some of those imperfections, you're going to be upset. So just make sure you do that. If this was helpful, let me know. I hope that you got some insight and some, you know, good knowledge out of this. If there's something that you're not quite sure about, leave a message in the comments. I try to respond to everybody. And if there's something that you think that I could benefit from, like that you have in your workflow that you could share with me, please do that in the comments as well. I really would appreciate that and help my workflow as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching.